Hello, everyone. This is Ted Czech, Public Relations Manager for the International Foundation for Protection Officers. I'm here with Dr. Glen Kitteringham. He is the co-author of the groundbreaking security survey that we recently published at IFPO. And also Glen has his own security company, the Kitteringham Group. Glen, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing great, thanks. Yeah, so the reason that we're getting together tonight is that there appears to be, at least if you follow the media, if you want to believe what the media is purporting, the U.S. seems to be in some type of crime wave, violent crime wave, and so I wanted to talk about that. You are in Canada, but you said to me before we got this started that it appears as though the Great White North is going through something similar, and also I mean, you know, you've been in security for decades, and you keep tabs on what's going on here in the United States. So I'd say you're qualified to talk about it.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm going to do a little shared screen here, and get to. Let's see if I can get to the first. Just bear with me here while that disappears. Okay, so here is a YouTube video. LA on edge amid rash of smash and grabs. So there is, well, here we have a Los Angeles Police Department detective who is very concerned, and he's reflecting, I think, the concerns of a lot of police. Explains his frustration with liberal policies. Basically the police in Los Angeles feel hamstrung by the I guess the lack of follow through in the justice system for individuals who are being arrested. I believe I did watch the video, and he said that faster than they can fill out their report, these individuals are being released back into the streets. Glen, what do you make of this? Because it's not just happening in Los Angeles, but in other cities around the country.
Right. So, okay. So, I first want to I guess, make this somewhat conditional, where I certainly don't consider myself an expert on U.S. Criminology or criminal issues, but I do keep tabs of what is going on. And I do believe that, yes, there is some geographic areas in the United States are seeing a surge in criminal activity. And based on my understanding of this, it's mostly happening in democratically controlled cities. And I also see this as a similarity to what we saw in the United States in a lot of the big democratically controlled cities in the late 1950s, the 60s, and the 70s, where these Democratic mayors were not holding these criminals accountable. And it wasn't until they made a change and they started hiring these Republican, or replacing them, voting in these Republican mayors who started holding criminals accountable. And we're seeing the same thing. And my take on what's particularly California is probably the worst example, or maybe, I guess it depends on your perspective, the best example of not holding criminals accountable for their actions. And certainly what's going on in LA, I'm very well aware of it, with the homeless and the vulnerable population, and people like the street people and the people with mental health issues. And LA is pretty bad from everything I've seen. San Francisco, I think, is the epicenter of all this.
Right. I've got something here. If I can get to it. That other button bar keeps invading.
Yeah. So, but I mean, I was in San Francisco 5 years ago. I wouldn't go back. There's no way I'd go back. I mean, it was bad then. And I know that some people are saying, well, that's just the way it is, and that's life in the big city. But I disagree. That's not how life in the big city is. And I do think that, that some of these cities are in the midst of a crime wave, and we're seeing this it's partly related, I think, to defund the police. It's partly related to the fact that the rich are being able to hire private security. But I think the biggest thing is it's catch and release, where the police are, as fast as they can arrest these individuals, the court systems are like, the courts are just letting them out.
Right.
And
Yeah, that was what the detective in LA said. Yeah, so here we have a recent video from KPIX in the Bay Area in San Francisco. Fed up with crime, San Francisco residents hire private security. So that's what they feel that they need to do. And here we've got footage of I think what appears to be a kind of a smash and grab. Guy hops out of one vehicle and takes some things out of another vehicle. Right there, not in broad daylight, but well, here's another one in broad daylight.
Right.
The other one was under the cover of night. But yeah, it's got people concerned, and they're doing what they feel they have to do by hiring security.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, part of this is the fact that we live in this upside down world now, where crime isn't crime. It's not. It's a political statement, and people are not being held accountable for their actions, and that if they are, that they're somehow being oppressed by the patriarchy. And to me, that's just an excuse. And I don't think it's certainly not as bad in Canada, but I do know personally that there are people who commit constant crimes. I'm in Calgary, Alberta, that they're arrested over and over and over again. And as fast as it's the same thing, as fast as they're being arrested, they're being released. And these judges are saying, well, it's a homeless person, or they've got a mental health issue. Putting them in prison is not going to help, or putting them in jail is not going to help. As far as I'm concerned, it will help, because it'll keep them from constantly breaking into offices and breaking into homes. And, I'd like to see, if these judges don't think it's all that big of a deal, then they should be housing these people that they're releasing out on the street, and see how long they'd put up with that before they'd throw them in jail.
Yeah, probably not.
Yeah, it wouldn't last very long. So, but we've got these, that I'm sure everybody's familiar with the term activist judges, right? They don't want to. Not only do they not want to enforce the law, they want to make their own rules, and they want to make these political statements.
I seem to remember at some point during COVID that there were some cities here in the United States that that said, hey, you know what, we're not going to arrest people for the petty crimes.
Right.
And so I'm wondering, so we're going to be kinder and gentler to criminals, I guess. So I'm wondering if that emboldened people, to just, oh, okay, they're not going to arrest me. Well, geez, it's open season.
Yeah. Now, I'm the first to admit that from a cost benefit analysis, if you're going to arrest somebody for stealing, $10 worth of property, and then throw them in jail for a month, it's probably going to cost the city or the municipality, could cost them $10,000, $20,000. I mean, there's not much of a, I guess you could argue, a return on investment perspective, but it's also my experience from a pure security perspective. I'll give you an example. Years ago, I used to work for a property management company, and we used to have these Stampede barbecues every year. And there was always this one small group of people who would show up at all the barbecues, and they would help themselves to all the free food they could get their hands on. And, they'd stand in line for the pancake breakfast, and they'd get 5 or 6 pancake breakfasts in a row. And they would help themselves to, they were down and out to a certain extent. And so they would help themselves to what food they could get their hands on. And finally, one year I decided, you know what, it's not that big of a deal. I'm going to let them just, if they want to stand in line, and if they want to help themselves to half a dozen juice boxes, that's fine. But we found that within half an hour that they were stealing stuff. They were helping themselves to flats of food and flats of products and merchandise. And so that little social experiment that I tried it myself quickly came to an end. And we had to stop them from taking, because they would have taken everything that wasn't nailed down. And that, to me, this is what's happening on a much larger scale. And again, I think this epicenter of all this is San Francisco, where the criminals very quickly realize even the security personnel are not arresting them. Nobody's physically going near these criminals, so they're going in there and helping themselves to everything, and it just grows and grows and grows, and it emboldens these criminals. And I mean, that's human nature. You get away with it, you keep doing it until you no longer get away with it. And unfortunately, it is in many cases, it's the private sector that's paying the price for these political decisions.
I guess, the silver lining is that, the screen that I was just sharing there, in the San Francisco area, the security companies are doing really well. So there's that.
Yeah, but I don't know if, I mean, and this is where I'm going to plead ignorance. I don't know if let's say in a city like San Francisco or LA, so they've got, all these extra security officers, but I don't know if they're allowed to, like, if their presence alone is supposed to be a deterrence, or if they're actually physically stopping people from stealing property, or if they're actually making arrests or not.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Every state here is different as far as, what a security officer is able to do. Yeah, I mean, if it's on private property, yeah, could they make an arrest of some type, or detain? They might be able to detain.
Well, but my point though is there's things that you're legally allowed to do, but whether they're encouraged to do it or not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like I'm sure they're legally allowed to arrest somebody who's stealing property, but are they arresting these people? Because, if and when the police are showing up, are they just, letting them go because there's no point even them taking them back to the police station? Or this is not a slam against law enforcement in any way. Right. Is there a point in even arresting them because the police are powerless in these cases as well?
Well, and one could look at I guess the most popular crimes, the ones that are being televised, that are in the news, are these smash and grabs, where you have a mob of people that will get into a store and smash all the glass cases and steal everything. But I recently I posted something on the IFPO website and social media about a guy who was a security officer. He's a former police officer turned security officer out in California. I'm not sure whether it was Los Angeles or San Francisco, but he was guarding a news team that was covering the smash and grabs. And then somebody or several somebodies from the smash and grab crew turned and, on the news crew. And this guy tried to defend them, and he ended up getting shot and died. Yeah,
that just happened last week, I believe.
Yeah. So you could look at the smash and grabs and be like, oh, well, that's the company has insurance and it's not a big deal. Just let them do it. But it can turn violent quickly on a dime.
Well, and this is proof of broken windows theory in play. And for those of the listeners who are not familiar with broken windows theory, it's an environmental crime control theory that posits that if incivilities, and by incivilities, minor infractions and violations of law, are left unchecked, which is, minor littering and verbal abuse and low levels of harassment and jaywalking, if that's left unattended, it can very quickly escalate into the more serious crimes. And that's the whole concept of broken windows theory, is what they used to turn around New York City from the late 70s into the early 80s. And, I remember reading back in the late 70s, New York City was verging on 2,000 murders a year. And, and then they voted in a Republican mayor, if I remember correctly, it was Rudy Giuliani, and he empowered the police. It wasn't just him. I mean, it was Bratton and a couple of other people as well, but they got sick and tired of the violence and the crime. And so they did everything from clean up the subways, and they handed out tickets for jaywalking and for littering and for all these minor infractions. But what they found was that by cracking down on the minor infractions, it led to a massive reduction in serious criminal activity. And so we're seeing the very opposite here, where we're seeing people allowed to get away with all kinds of minor issues. They're very, very quickly escalating into more serious offenses. And so unfortunately, that's human nature. You keep pushing the boundaries and you see what you get away with. That's the nature of being human, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, that's both good and bad, right? And so anyway, I think we'll hit the wall here where somebody's going to say enough is enough.
Right.
We will not tolerate these incivilities anymore, or this illegitimate behavior. And then they're going to have to start cracking down again and start holding people accountable for their actions.
There's going to be a correction.
Yeah.
It's a pendulum swing. So, and here we have that, the Oakland City Council, actually, well, it is a proposal by the mayor to add 2 new police academies and unfreeze positions within the department to add 60 new officers. So, Oakland, I guess, said, it says here in this story, longtime leader in the Black Lives Matter movement, to cut police funding. So now they're reversing course. So I find that very interesting. Yeah, they've had enough, apparently.
Right.
And then here we have back to San Francisco. San Francisco stores can hire off-duty deputies to battle crime. So these are security officers, but they're law enforcement officers by day, if you will. So they have the training and they have the knowledge. So San Francisco sheriff's deputies can soon get paid time and a half by private retailers to guard against shoplifting while off duty, similar to police officers, amid a push to combat retail theft in the city. So there is things are happening. There is a response, at least in some areas of the country. So
yeah, and I've seen some reversal of policies in Seattle and Portland as well. And again, it's these, as far as I'm concerned, my understanding is it's these democratically controlled cities who've let their citizenry get out of control, and now they're recognizing, as you said, the pendulum has swung too far, and now it's going to start swinging back the other way.
Yeah, at first, when these smash and grabs started, there was a lot of headlines about them. I thought, oh, is this the Christmas season? I thought maybe it was that. Oh, it's folks that not that makes it okay, but oh, okay, it's people getting Christmas gifts. But yeah, I don't think so. I don't think that's the case.
From what I've read, a lot of these a lot of the more serious escalating criminal activity in the retail environment is organized retail crime. Right.
Yeah. No. True. That point was made. I can't remember where I saw it, but that these crews were pulling up in vehicles, and yeah, that it was a very calculated, organized effort.
Yeah. I've done research in that area of organized retail crime, and absolutely, you've got some professionals who they make it's an occupation just like you and I work 40 or 50 hours a week at doing what we do. These people are criminals full-time, 40, 50 hours a week. The only difference is what they do, it's all tax-free.
So they approach it like a business.
Oh, absolutely. And I years ago, probably 15 years ago, I interviewed a guy, and he had a partner, and they had 3 young juveniles working with him, and they had a circuit, Calgary to Edmonton, which is about 300 kilometers, 180 miles. And they, and plus about 25 miles on either side of the main highway that's corridor between the 2 cities. And he admitted to me that they stole everything that wasn't nailed down and traveled around with in a big Ford F-350 super cab, and they pulled a 50-foot trailer, and they worked at it, 50 hours a week. And
Wow.
So it was a business, absolutely, and they weren't the only ones. I mean, I talked to a number of these people, and even the homeless. Some of the homeless people that I talked to were involved in organized retail crime, and they were stealing. You know, that's how they survived on the streets, and they were stealing to sell to their drug dealers. Eventually, when they always started off, they would steal and then sell it to the drug dealers, and then turn around and buy drugs, and then eventually just cut out the middle component, and they just traded stolen property for the
goods for the drugs. Yeah,
right, for the drugs, absolutely. And it's there's a lot of money to be made in organized retail crime. Well, that statistics, it's just a growing issue. I mean, to the tune of billions of dollars a year.
Yeah, I mean, and I remember doing some research on it some time ago, and found out that companies, large retail companies, have it worked into their budget. They just say, well, off the top, we're going to lose X amount of money every year due to retail theft, and they just kind of shrug their shoulders at it.
Well, that's referred to shrink. At least, I mean, I worked years ago for a national retailer, and I worked both loss prevention and internal investigations, and there was acceptable shrink and unacceptable shrink. And I mean, I'm going back more than 20 years now from when I was working in that environment. But if I remember correctly, we were expected to hold shrink at, around 1.52% of total sales.
So you're at a threshold for it.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously they wanted to get that down to zero as much as possible, but it was factored in. But if shrink was more than a couple of percent, because the margins are very narrow, but in the retail environment, obviously that depending upon if you're selling, $1,000 handbags versus shaving cream, but the margins typically are very narrow, and a retailer cannot afford more than 1.5% to 2% shrink. It'll put them out of business.
And the other thing I remember is this one particular company. They instructed their employees not to confront someone they suspected of stealing, only to say, "Oh, I saw you were looking at that item. Would you like to purchase it?" But not to say anything further than that, not to escalate matters.
Well, yeah, I actually applied for a national retailer that no longer exists here in Canada anymore, but as a loss prevention officer. But when I found out that their policy was to not arrest shoplifters and to just basically make your presence known to them, and hopefully they would ditch the product before they walked out the door, I walked away from the interview. I wasn't gonna work in that environment. That was ridiculous.
Right. The other thing that you said, Glenn, that interests me is about the guys that were running that ring, was that they had recruited young kids, I guess, or juveniles.
Yeah, juveniles.
Yeah. They kind of reminded me of Oliver Twist. Probably been going on for a long time, but that's unfortunate. That children, minors get involved, get sucked into that type of thing, and get influenced by adults. Coerced or maybe even forced to do such things,
Yeah, well, I mean, I didn't get into the nature of the relationship, but I remember the guy told me that he had 3, 15, 16-year-olds working for him. And he said they were very well compensated for what they did. And the reason he used them was because when they were arrested, it was a less serious offense for juveniles than it was for adults.
Right.
And so, him and his partner, they would act in the background and let the juveniles actually do the actual thieving.
There you go. Okay. Yeah, kind of like
it's also very, very prevalent. I mean, I talked to a number of offenders and I asked them to estimate roughly how often they shoplifted versus how often they were caught. And I mean, it was pretty tough because it's not like they were keeping track of how often they were shoplifting, but they estimated collectively that probably for every 200 or 300 times that they were shoplifted, they got caught once.
Mm. Mm. So it was worth it.
Oh yeah, huge, absolutely. Oh yeah, for career criminals, going to jail is that's the cost of doing business. It's not a deterrence. It's just so they get caught. But most of the 99% of the time they don't get caught, and the one time that they do get caught, well, it's a crapshoot as to whether they actually are going to get arrested or possibly released, or they can fight their way out of the situation, or they get a slap on the wrist anyway. I mean, I've gone to court and testified many, many times, and they were often, time served or just found guilty, but slap on the wrist, nothing happened to them. That's just the cost of doing business. Like, the only people who have anything to fear from the criminal justice system are the middle class, as far as I'm concerned. They've got something to lose.
Yeah. Oh, geez. Well, so I hope that, I hope that, this, we can call it a crime wave, that it's able to be turned around, that more cities, come to their senses, shall we say.
Yeah, well, I mean, based on the articles that you're showing me and also what I'm reading, I do think the pendulum is swinging the other way. I mean, again, you go to me, the epicenter of all this is San Francisco. Mm-hmm. Until they toss out all those politicians who are allowing this, and until, I mean, they tried recalling Gavin Newsom, right? And he soundly defeated his opponent. So that's telling, and that's ironic because from what I understand, there's thousands and thousands of former Californians moving out of California and going to other states.
They're all going to Texas.
Right. And so the ones who are leaving are the ones who are not putting up with this, but the ones who are staying are saying, well, this is acceptable. Like, crime is a cost of living in modern society, and I'm fine with that. And so I don't see these big politicians getting tossed out anytime soon.
Well, yeah, and that was, as I recall, that was another thing that LAPD detective said, was that Newsom had to go. Everything comes from the top down.
Yeah.
So he was blaming Newsom for that, and said, yeah, that guy's got to go, and maybe his replacement would enact some tougher.
Yeah. I was watching that election with interest because I really hoped that he was going to get recalled and then he was going to get tossed out, but unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you view democracy, you know what, he's safe. And
the people spoke.
People spoke, and that's the. Yeah. It always reminds me of one of my favorite quotes, Winston Churchill, who said that democracy is the worst form of government in existence, except all the rest.
Oh man, yeah. So, any final thoughts, Glenn, on this predicament?
No, I mean, I feel for everybody down in the United States. I mean, it sounds trite to say this, but it's not fair. But we all know that life's not fair, and I hope that the pendulum does start swinging the other way, and that the law-abiding citizens and law enforcement and security practitioners are hopefully that will triumph, and that people will smarten up and realize that turning a blind eye to criminal activity it's not helping. It's not going to help the situation, because you've got a small group of people. And I learned this long time ago, that there's a small group of people out there who view niceness as weakness. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, and I know that, again, that sounds very trite, but, you're trying to say these people need a hand up, and you're trying to say that it's a political statement, and there's all kinds of things being said in all this. But the problem is that there's as I've just said, there's a small group of people who view that if you're nice, you're weak. Mm-hmm. And they'll take advantage of that.
Yeah. So the majority of people want to just live their lives and get along and enjoy. Some people prefer to live in cities. They like the city. They want to live in the city and not be victims of crime. That's not a huge ask. But I think the other thing that I fear is that we might have something where somebody stands up for themselves, and then there's a big blow up about it. It's gonna
Right.
get, the media will get a hold of it and blow it out of proportion, and that, I think sooner or later we're going to see one of those. I mean,
yeah. Well, I think what you're talking about is vigilantism, and it's ironic is that in actual periods in history where vigilantism has come about, it's because there's been a complete breakdown in trust of government. And I'm not talking about lynch mobs or anything else. I'm not talking about that. I am talking about people taking the law into their own hands because they're frustrated because they can't get official government support. And
we just had a big case here, that the Kyle Rittenhouse case.
Right. I was just going to say, you just had a massive case where he was found not guilty, and that's really polarized not only United States, but I know it's on social media up here, and there's still people who absolutely think that what he did was reprehensible and that he should have been found guilty. And it was, all the rhetoric about open season on to be able to kill whoever you want, which is, to me, is utter nonsense. I mean, I watched several days of that case, and I read about it as much as I could, and thankfully, both the United States and Canada and other political systems, we have the right to protect ourselves, and we have the right to defend ourselves. And
that's what it came down to. It was a case about self-defense.
Right. And some people don't like that. And it's too bad for them, as far as I'm concerned.
I was just watching an interview with him today. He said, I think it was the day before, he was helping to remove graffiti from some building. I don't know if it's a school or something, and so, he was there to help.
Right. Yeah.
But anyway, Glenn, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me on.
Hopefully this video, facilitates some discussion among folks. And most importantly, hopefully the crime wave, we're going to see a decline in that. But thank God for security officers, because they're stepping up and helping out.
Yeah. No, I agree. I do hope that things level down.
All right. Thanks again, Glenn, and we'll talk to you soon.
You bet. Thank you, Ted.